Hello everyone, this is Major Green, also known as Nitpicking Nerd, and this is a review of episode 10 of Star Trek Discovery. And in this episode, the Discovery accidentally jumps into the mirror universe. And this whole episode, the whole beginning of the episode, the first half of the episode, nothing really happens. Like they're just trying to figure out what's going on, and it takes so long, and so it's so boring. So I think the quality of the show is just as bad as it used to be in the previous episodes. I was still hoping that the show might get better. The previous episode was actually pretty good because it had a lot of action, a lot of stuff was going on. It wasn't as boring. But in this episode, once again, it's so boring. It takes so long to get anywhere. And they also violate the number one rule of movie making, which is show, don't tell. For example, they encounter another ship, but they just talk to them through the audio. They never show them on screen or through holograms, so they never actually see them, and that ship just goes away. So they could have simply showed us a ship of the mirror universe, but instead they just salvage some wreckage, and they study the wreckage of that Klingon ship, and they find out that it had Vulcan and Andorian crew members, and it has Vulcan technology, and they discover a database which shows them that instead of the Federation there is a Terran Empire, and all the other species are basically rebelling against them. So the way they showed us all this information, they didn't show us, they just told us, and that's what I found so boring and annoying, because basically Michael just stands up there for 5 minutes and gives us a lecture about the history of the mirror universe, and we never actually see anything. So it's just people talking in a room for most of the episodes. So I didn't like that at all. They should have done what all the other shows did, which is actually show us the mirror universe instead of just telling us about it. So that's the number one problem in this episode. It's just too boring, too long in the beginning, and also the same kind of visual stuff that annoys me, which I talked a lot about. For example, two people stand and talk, and I guess they decided that it's just too boring, so we have to do something neat with the camera. So why not make the camera spin around them for no reason, like spin it around the characters instead of just cutting from one to the other. I think this kind of camera work should only be done when it's necessary for some reason. So if you want to show something from different sides, then it might be great. But if you just have two people talking and then for no reason you decide to spin the camera around them, it's just annoying. For me, I have motion sickness. I don't like unnecessary movements of the camera. Another thing that bugged me, they say that the stars themselves are different in this universe. Star constellations are different. It doesn't really make sense. It was never mentioned in any of the other episodes about the mirror universe in Star Trek. No one ever said that the star charts are different. So that's number one. Number two, it doesn't really make sense that if there is such a big change in the universe, how comes all the same planets still exist with the same exact species and the same exact people in all the universes? It doesn't make sense. It was always kind of, the mirror universe was always kind of stupid, because if you have centuries of different histories, how come the same exact people are getting born and then serve on the exact same ship as in our universe? So it always was kind of fishy, and I think the only way to make such a scenario plausible is to say that it's kind of like a different timeline, like both universes were exactly the same up until some point, and then basically a new timeline started. I think my favorite theory is that it started in First Contact, like we saw in Enterprise, when Zephyr and Cochrane killed that Vulcan. I choose to believe that's where the mirror universe started. That's where history split off differently, and so all the history before that is basically the same. And when they first showed the mirror universe in the original series, it was kind of okay, because it was through a transporter malfunction, so they had the exact same crew members transporting to exact same planet, and maybe that's what allowed that connection to such a similar universe in which a lot of things are different, but still the same people exist, because that just happened to be one of the many universes that exists. And maybe because of that transporter malfunction, it basically kind of picked them the exact universe in which the same people exist. So you could kind of accept that in the original series. I think the problem started in Deep Space Nine, in which it was a century later, and yet still exactly the same people exist, even though history is radically different. So of course that was kind of silly. But here they make it even more silly, because they say that even the stars are different, the constellations are different, so that means all the solar system should be different, so how come all the same planets exist? So this makes it even more absurd. And it can work if it's a show that doesn't take itself too seriously. So if it was like an Orwell type of show, and like the older Star Trek shows, which were always with a lot of humor, you could kind of accept such an episode as a once in a while kind of comedic episode in which everyone are evil. So that would be fine, but in this show they are trying to be so realistic and so serious, so an episode like this doesn't really work. Like, if you want it to work, you need to make it more clever. And by the way, in Star Trek TNG, they had the best possible explanation for such an episode in the episode Yesterday's Enterprise. The episode basically took place in a kind of a mirror universe, which was created in the episode itself. It basically shows that only 20 years ago the timeline changed, and then it made sense why the same people exist. Like, the change happened after they were born. And also, not everybody from the crew were on the same ship. Like, Troy wasn't there, Worf wasn't there, and Tasha was suddenly there instead. And so the crew did kind of change, so it wasn't exactly the same people. And in Voyager, they had kind of an episode in which some other civilization was making a simulation of Voyager of how their history books talked about it, and they showed Voyager as being kind of an evil crew. So that was another brilliant episode, which was kind of the evil mirror universe episode of that show. Again, not really the mirror universe, but a hologram simulation, which again made a lot more sense. And so TNG and Voyager had the smarter versions of this kind of evil universe. In Deep Space Nine, that was probably the stupidest one. It also had a bunch of contradictions in between episodes. Like, in one episode, they said that there are no cloaking devices in the mirror universe, and in another one earlier, we saw that they did have them, and so there was a complete contradiction. And in Enterprise, we had a very good episode, a two-part episode about the mirror universe, which also tied into another episode of the original series with the Defiant ship. And that episode was a lot of fun. And by the way, they acknowledge that episode in this one. They show that a ship called the Defiant Constitution class arrived into this universe. So I did like that they acknowledged it. It was kind of strange. They only showed the diagram of that ship instead of showing the full ship. So I guess they're planning to do some kind of reimagining of the original model. And that's why they don't show all the details. They only show the general shape of the ship, but without any detail. So I suspect they might be planning to do some reimagining of the old model, just like they did with the Klingon ships and the Klingon look and all of that. And speaking about the Klingons, it's finally confirmed that Tyler is indeed Vok. Which would have been a good twist if they did that earlier, but they waited so long that pretty much everybody knows it already, so they dragged this out way too long, and so it's not really surprising, it's not really a twist, and they keep dragging it out, so Tyler himself doesn't really realize it yet. And there was a scene in the brig in which he comes to L'Oreal to talk with her, and what annoyed me in that scene is that there is no guard in the brig. In all the other shows, they always show you that there's at least one person sitting guarding the prisoners, which made sense because what if the prisoner tries to escape or commit suicide or something? You have to have someone to keep an eye on him. But apparently here in Discovery, they just leave someone in the brig behind one force field, and anyone can just open it with one press of a button. So anyone can come in and just press one button, open, to release the prisoner, and no one is watching. There is no guard there, so that's kind of ridiculous. L'Oreal basically confirms that he's indeed Vok, and he releases her from the brig, but for some reason she stays there. So over half the episode is just about them analyzing technical details of the Klingon wreckage they found, and they discovered that the Klingon ships had Vulcan and Andorian crew members and some Vulcan technology. And I was like, yes, we get it already. You're in the mirror universe. There's no need to take so long to explain it. Just cut to the chase already and don't drag this too long. It's so boring and so annoying. Could have simply contacted that ship in the beginning and see that they had different uniforms and symbols, see how they behave, and maybe that ship will attack them and they have to destroy them, and then that would basically cut to the chase faster. But instead, that ship for some reason communicated with them with audio only, for absolutely no reason except to drag the reveal out longer. Stuff like this is why I hate this show, like things that don't make sense and just to drag everything longer and more boring. And because it's a serialized show instead of episodic, so they take their sweet time. They are not in a hurry to actually get to the story, and so the actual story only begins in the last 10 minutes, and it's of course a cliffhanger, so leaving all the excitement to the next episode to force people to keep watching the show. And I think the older style of episodic shows was much better because it basically forced the episode to have a beginning, middle, and end, and not to drag out too long. So they had to have story with conclusion in every single episode, so they couldn't afford to drag it out. And yet in this show, they just take their sweet time to get to the point, and they only do something interesting in the very end of the episode to make people, to fool people to think it was a good episode. So they add some action in the very end of the episode, and then people leave the episode with a thought, wow, that was cool, that was nice, but most of the episode was just boring. And so it's not a good thing. I much prefer the episodic episodes, and maybe with the occasional two-part episodes, if the story is too long to really properly do it in one episode. And maybe with some overarching story arc, just like Deep Space Nine did. They did have some overarching story arc, but also each episode had its own story as well. So that was the perfect combination, in my opinion, the way that Deep Space Nine did it. And yet here they kind of take that slow route of, like many TV series today do, of just dragging it from episode to episode and never getting any conclusion. You can clearly see it in this episode, like instead of simply encountering the Empire right away, instead they discover it slowly, they pick up all the evidence, they study, they analyze it, and then Michael is making a monologue, a long speech, a 5-minute speech, explaining about the Empire instead of actually showing us. They just tell us, and so show, don't tell. And only toward the end of the episode it finally started getting better, because finally something started happening. So anyway, they dress up as the Empire soldiers, and somehow they know exactly how to behave to impersonate the Terran officers of this universe, even though they never actually saw how they behave. So that was also kind of silly. Was it written in the database how people behave in this universe? So it didn't make sense. So when they started behaving just like they should be, it was kind of too perfect, even though they did try to add small mistakes, but those mistakes were kind of stupid. For example, they see the salute of the Empire and they imitate it, but then Michael keeps her hand up for no reason, and that was stupid, and they looked at her, why are you keeping your hand up? And then she kind of, oh, alright. So I get what they were trying to do, but they did it in a stupid way that didn't make sense, so that was kind of silly. Also, the Doctor gets killed in this episode, and I was actually cheering when that happened, because I hate all these characters so much that whenever any one of them dies, I'm happy. So that also says something, I think, that if you're rooting for your characters to die, then something is terribly wrong with this show. The only one that I don't want to die is Captain Lorca, because he's an a-hole, but he's kind of fun, in a funny way, so I like him. That he's the only one that I don't want them to kill off. And there was one scene of him punching his own face into a wall, and that's exactly what I wanted to do after watching some of the episodes of the show, because the show is so terrible and it's just so stupid, so much missed opportunities. Everybody else to me are expendable. Like, I wish they would kill everyone and just replace them with new characters. So if they go the Game of Thrones route, that would actually be a good thing in the show, because all these characters are terrible, so I don't mind them killing them off. Every time that happens, I cheer. So that says it all about the show, I think. So only toward the very end of this episode, interesting things start to happen, and of course that's when they end the episode. So only when the cool stuff begins, then they end it. So you have to wait till next week to see the continuation. So I guess I'll keep watching just to make the reviews at least. There are some cool moments, there are some interesting moments, but overall it's just way too boring, way too much filler. Most of this episode they were just standing in the same rooms of their ship, not going anywhere. It's like a bottle show, and nothing happens. They just tell you stuff without showing it. So terrible. So I don't give this. I saw some people praising this episode. I don't get why. Except the final 10 minutes, nothing happened in this episode. Nothing that we don't know already. So it's not interesting. It's boring. It's depressing. It's unoriginal. It's just crap. So I don't think this show will improve. I don't recommend this show. I will probably keep watching just to make reviews. So that's it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.